Hello, welcome to my new video. So in the previous video, we looked at how we can do the classification. In this video, I'm going to tell a little bit more about the classification, but again, this is mainly focusing on the training of the classifiers. So, as you know, in UiPath Document Understanding, we have three different classifiers: keyword-based, intelligent keyword, and the machine learning classifier. So if anyone asks, out of these classifiers, what are the classifiers you can train? Well, the answer is you can train all three classifiers. But can you also train these classifiers during the process execution? Yes, you can. So this is usually done. We basically call it fine-tuning in a way because the classifier is already trained. And what you're doing during the execution is you are using the trained data to predict the classification. And if it is wrong, you are using the manual intervention to tell the bot that this is the correct classification. And that information is what we are going to use to train the classifier during the runtime. So it is more like adding on top of the same knowledge it has to make it better. So all three classifiers can be trained during the execution as well. So let's quickly see in the UiPath Studio how the training part looks like. So in the UiPath Studio, this is the this is the classify document scope, which we did last time. So I placed two classifiers to show how these things are configured. And when it comes to the classifier training, this usually comes after manual classification. So for example, we are not going to use the automatic classification data to train the classifier. In other words, if the classifier is predicting the document properly, we don't need to use that data again to train the classifier because it already knows that this document is of this type. The classification training we usually do when the model cannot predict accurately. So in that case, that usually comes through a manual verification process. This could be either through attended version or unattended version. So if it is attended, we use the classification station, the activity you see on the screen. If it is unattended, we use the action center, and for that we have two other different activities. So let's get to those activities a bit later. But in general, the training during runtime happens based on the data you get from the person who verifies it. So that usually comes through these activities. And once we have these activities, we use that data in the train classifier scope. So in my workflow, this is very sequential. You have one after the other. But when you're designing your workflow, make sure the training should happen only for the manually verified data. Okay, so let's see how we can do the training during runtime. So this is the train classifier scope, which looks exactly the same as the classification scope. But here we have several activities. We can place all the trainer activities inside this. So let's search for those trainer activities. So when it comes to classification training, we have three activities. One is the keyword-based classifier trainer. The other one is intelligent keyword classifier trainer. And lastly, the other one is machine learning classifier trainer. I'm placing all three here just to show you something that you need to know. So as soon as you place the machine learning classifier, you can see it is asking either for an endpoint or an ML skill. This is because ML classification requires a model hosted in AI Center or in the Document Understanding service. So if you want to know more about the use of ML classifier and how to train the the classifiers in AI Center, you can refer to the video that I have attached here in the description to see how you can train the classifiers. But for now, let's focus on this step. So if you have a model hosted, either you can use the public endpoint or you can provide the ML skill. As of now, I don't have anything, so I'm just canceling that. So when it comes to classifier trainer activities, you can see the machine learning classifier looks a bit different, but the keyword-based classifier and the intelligent keyword classifier look pretty much the same. So there is a thing to remember about these classifiers. Earlier you learned that there are two classifiers that will be using a JSON file to store its knowledge. So what are those classifiers? It is the keyword classifier and the intelligent keyword classifier. They have their own JSON files. So when it comes to training, there is always two activities that refers to JSON files. That is the keyword classifier trainer and the intelligent keyword classifier trainer. For the machine learning classifier, it is different. So before getting into that, let's see how to configure this. When it comes to keyword-based classifier, you can just go to the solution, open this, and provide the correct JSON file. And you don't need to do anything here. This window looks exactly the same what you see in the classifier configuration part in the classifier document scope. And down here, under this scope activity, you have configure classifiers. And from here, you can say which classifier you want to be trained for a specific document type. So for example, if I want to train the keyword classifier for the invoices, I can enable it here and click on save. So likewise, you can do it even for multiple classifiers for the same document type or for different document types. Let's say I want the configuration to look like this. And for the intelligent keyword classifier also, you can define the JSON file path, and that's it. So that's the simple configuration. For the machine learning classifier, you have few extra things. Here, you can provide the training data to the machine learning classifier in different ways. Either you can store that data locally in a local drive, or else you can push that data to the dataset through the activity itself here. And when you are pushing the data to the dataset, you have two options. One, put it directly to the dataset through this option over here, or else if your dataset is public or set to public, where your dataset also has an endpoint, you can use the endpoint and the dataset API key, and through that you can push that data to the dataset. So there are two ways to put the data to the dataset. One, by configuring the project and the dataset, so it goes and gets saved there, or else you can use the endpoint and the API key. So these are the different methods you have to train the data or store the data. And if you store the data locally, you can then use a manual process to upload that data to the dataset by going into the AI Center and uploading it directly from there. Those are the different methods we have to train the machine learning classifier. All right, let's get to the documentation. So this is the train classifier scope. Remember, the train classifier scope supports these kind of document types. And in the train classifier scope, you have two different options to get the classification data. If you look at the activity, you have the human validated data and human validated classification data. So in my case here, I have used the human validated classification data to get the training data directly coming from the present classification station. Or this could come from the classifier, the action center activities. So either way, you get the same type of data. And this is of type classification result. It's an array. So you can use that. If you're using that variable, you need to use the human validated classification data. But there is another option where you can use human validated data. And this is of type extraction result. So where do you get this kind of data types? It's actually coming from the data extraction scope. You can see this extraction result is of type extraction result. So either you can use the data that's coming from data extraction scope to train your classification, or you can use the classifier data. But you cannot use both at the same time. It should be either one of those. So it's also described here. Human validated classification data is the output of the classification station, which is an array, or you can get this data from the validation station. This is actually coming from two different sources, so you can refer to this documentation to learn more about that. But remember, it's either one of those you can use at a given time. Now, let's look at the machine learning classifier. So with this one, I want to show you something. So basically, the machine learning classifier is pre-trained for certain document types. So if you get the capabilities just from that little pop-up window that came when you dragged and dropped the activity, that will show the capabilities when you so if you go here and configure this and click on the get capabilities, it will give you all the knowledge it has about different document types. So if it is already trained, you will see a drop down here and you can select the appropriate document type from them. Or else you can type it if you're doing this for the very first time and it's not trained for any document type. So if you're typing, that has to go in within double quotes. So that's also described in this documentation over here. And this is how it looks like if it is already trained on different document types. And once you upload this data to the data set, how will that data look like? It will actually use the name of the document type within the classifier dataset to store the training data, just like this. So that is how the training is done for the classifiers. So that's it for this video, and I hope this was helpful for you to understand how the training is done and how the classification needs to be configured, what are the different ways you can train the machine learning classifier, and what are the similarities you see in different classifier trainer activities. Also, a little bit about the best practices, how you can train. So, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in another video focusing on a different topic. Thanks again.